Kim, how are you?
Busy. Lots to try to figure out these days.
There's a report that came in. That one caught me by surprise. I was on the air and it came in. And it was about the Pentagon, according to Wall Street Journal. The Pentagon approved 2,500 Marines to head to the Middle East. And there's a lot of talks about Karg Island, which is like a small island in the south of Iran, which does 90% of the refining. And there's talks about seizing that island, which every analyst I spoke to just says this is a wild strategy, very, very risky strategy. Now, obviously, I don't have intelligence. I don't know how weak Iran's military is, America's military capabilities, their munition stockpiles. I don't have all these details. But all of it just sounds so surreal. Every day I wake up, it's like a new development. I'd love to get your thoughts on, just your general thoughts on the war, and more importantly, the sentiment in the US on this war as well, because everyone's talking about how this is the most unpopular war of our generation.
Yeah, it certainly is. At least at this stage of a war. Typically, during a war, Americans will rally around it in the beginning, and then after a while, it loses popularity. But this one in particular is unpopular from the beginning, and that is obviously practically everybody on the left is against the war, except for the neocons in Washington. They're always for the war. You've got Hillary Clinton saying, she seems to be siding with Donald Trump when it comes to the things that are more warmongery. And a lot of people on the right, many Republicans are also scratching their head wondering, why are we in this war? And I didn't vote for this. I specifically voted for no more Middle Eastern wars. Yeah. And now here we are in another war. So it is very unpopular. I think that the big question that everybody has is, what is the point of this? What's the end game? How do we win this war? So you took out the Ayatollah, and then what? His son took over. So we're not getting regime change. It's not Venezuela. You can't just take out the leader and then end up with a government that's willing to work with you. I think the big question is, people just want to know exactly, how do we get out of this now that we're in it without it escalating into a 20-year war? And Iran is sitting there saying, yeah, we're ready for that 20-year war. So
yeah, I saw the statement by the son telling America to leave the Middle East, empty out their bases here in the region, and to also pay repatriations to Iran, compensate them for the war. In other words, we're not going to be bending our knee, and we're going to continuing this war. So he's a lot more hawkish than his father. But you're talking about how we're going to get out of this war, which is what everyone's talking about. What I'm struggling to understand, Kim, and I'd love to get your thoughts on it, is how do we get into it? I was a fan of Trump early on, still am in many policies. When you're a fan of any leader of any country, it's not like you like everything they do or you dislike everything they do. You can pick and choose. I like his policy when it comes to relations with the EU, foreign policy when it comes dealing with free speech. I like these things. I don't like the way he's handled this war. So when it comes to Trump, he's kind of painted himself as being the peace president, as ending wars. It's been his narrative since the beginning, taking credit for ending wars that he didn't play much of a role in, like the one with India. And then suddenly he took a massive U-turn and he started the biggest war since Iraq, Afghanistan. What's your analysis with all the interviews and the coverage that you do of what led him to this in your mind?
Israel. I mean, that's the simple answer, that the Israelis made him do it. How did they get him to that point is the big question. How did they talk him into this? The Israelis have made it no secret that they have wanted this war for 47 years, that they've been eyeing this for a very long time, trying to talk administration after administration into this war for a long time. So the question is then, what was it that they were able to say to Donald Trump to get him to be the one to go for it? And it could be something as simple as they just stroked his ego, right? I mean, it could just be they said, well, no other president was strong enough. They weren't man enough. You're the greatest. You're the strongest. You're the toughest. And maybe that was just enough for him to say, yeah, you're right. I am tough. So let's just go ahead and do the one thing no other president was willing to do. It might have been as simple as that, because Trump does have a bit of a, people know they can manipulate him through his ego. And if you just say, look, this is one thing Obama and Biden wouldn't do, you're going to be the guy that does it, he might say, okay, fine. That's hard to believe, only because, it would be easier to believe that if he didn't run on I don't want to start any more Middle Eastern wars. Let's get out of these endless wars. This is ridiculous. These are all stupid mistakes. If he didn't run on that and he just never really brought up foreign policy, it would be easier to believe that he was just led into this through sheer narcissism and flattery. So the other question then is, okay, then how did they get him into this? How did they talk him into this? And what we know, these are just the facts that we know, is that Donald Trump worked very hard to suppress the Epstein files. He worked very, very hard. Why did he do that? There's a couple of theories I have. One, obviously, he could be in the files. I mean, that is something that everybody's wondering. Is he in the files? Is there something really compromising in those files that about him or somebody he loves, which is equally as powerful? If it's about one of his kids or his wife or somebody who's very, very close to him, that would be equally as powerful. So he could be in the files. One other theory I have is he's maybe in the files as an informant. One thing we also know is that Trump was very much he didn't like Jeffrey Epstein. He had a relationship with him and then he didn't. And we know that he was willing to talk to authorities during the investigations when others weren't. And so a question I have is, did he strike a plea deal? Was he in the files and there is something compromising, but he was able to strike a plea deal and say, look, I'll tell you everything I know, but I want immunity, leave me out of it. And that would maybe be exposed if we got the entirety of the files. I don't know. But then it's would he really wage an entire war and risk all of these lives just to suppress Epstein files, just to not reveal what's in the files? And I have a hard time believing it's about him in the files, because he doesn't, unless it's really bad, because he doesn't. I mean, he has survived so many scandals, so many of these even sexual scandals, that it's hard to imagine that would faze him this time around, unless it's something really, really, really heinous. So, this is the question. We don't know. It could be something. Another theory I've floated out there is maybe it is China. Maybe there is this desire to stop China at all costs. And Iran is a very geographically strategic nation for China and for Russia, but for China in particular. And the U.S. has done a lot to try to hinder China's Belt and Road Initiative. Taking Iran and controlling Iran, or at least destabilizing Iran and leaving the place a hellscape, would effectively halt quite a bit of China's Belt and Road Initiative. So this could be really truly aimed at China and preventing their economic rise, which many in the U.S. government and many Americans feel is a giant threat to their safety, security, and well-being. So that to me seems to be the most logical, that maybe he would, from a intelligent perspective, not that I agree with it, but I could understand from a strategic geopolitical perspective, destabilize Iran, and then China can't develop. But it is, immoral. It's totally immoral. And we've done this to many other areas of the world. As soon as China seems to strike a Belt and Road Initiative deal with a nation, suddenly something goes haywire in that country. A port blows up, or ISIS shows up, or ISIS-like affiliates, and the place is destabilized. And so it could be just a geopolitical strategy to halt the rise of China, but in a very immoral way that damages millions upon millions of lives.
I love this analysis because, I can see why you've got such a big audience, because you've just walked us through the various theories and how you've kind of thought them throughout this. Because I've gone through a very similar process. I've had a discussion where I even did a post before the war. I said something along the lines of, I expect a distraction while I was covering the Epstein files. I expect a distraction, could be Iran, could be something else. Now, the time it stopped being, that stopped being a justification for the war is when the Iran war went more than just a 2, 3, 4 day operation, when it became a prolonged war, now talking about boots on the ground and Gulf nations dragged into it. Because now it's become something so big that's even, I would say more damaging than what the Epstein files could have been. Now, we don't know what's there. We don't know what we don't know. But the war has just gone, taking a life of its own. And it's hurting his poll numbers as well. So then I went through the theory of Israel and how much influence they have over Trump. And I'm always kind of split on that, how much influence they have over Trump or of the government in general, the American government. That's more of a heartbreaking thing for me to see. You're looking at the world's biggest democracy, countries like where I'm from, Australia, kind of look up, and Europe, look up to the US as the beacon of freedom of speech, freedom, liberty. And to see the country fall hostage to a much smaller nation that's a lot more aggressive when it comes to its foreign policy. It's great for Israel, good for them. They've done well for themselves. It's not great for the world's biggest democracy. Now, I'm more, I'm kind of, jumping, between whether 30, 40% influence or that being a reason. I feel like there is too much influence. APAC, you can't lie, you can't make up the numbers. The numbers are there, they're facts. And looking what's happening now with TikTok and CBS, these are just facts. You can't deny facts. You can debate how much of an impact and influence they have. I think seeing what Trump did in the 12-day war, ending it relatively quickly, and also seeing what he did afterwards, forcing Netanyahu to apologize to Qatar, then I'm like, all right, maybe Israel has influence over Trump. Maybe they could have pushed him to strike Iran for a day or two, but I don't think they have enough influence to drag someone like Trump into what's looking more and more like a forever war. And then there's the China theory, which I hope is true, but I also hope is not true. Because if it's true, it means the US has a lot to gain from this war. It means it might go a lot further than what it already has because of the strategic benefit in controlling the Strait of Hormuz and being able to choke off energy from China. The same way China is doing it for rare earths against the US. So that's where it's a bad thing because it means the US will go a lot further in this. The good thing is at least it's easy to understand. Each country is fighting for strategic interests. I want the world's biggest democracy to win. I'm a pacifist, so I don't like wars, but at least it makes sense. It's a better story than doing it for Epstein or doing it for Israel. And then if you look at China's strategy, China, non-interventionist, they don't want to get into wars. And they're, the Belt and Road Initiative, they're building a system that's kind of backed by gold. They're buying up a lot of gold. So they're playing the long game. So for me, what worries me, Kim, and I'd love to get your thoughts on that, is what Ray Dalio talks about, the fall of an empire. As that's been a word, the 50, 80-year mark. The US debt interest is now higher. There's a law called the Ferguson's Law, where the interest you pay on your debt exceeds the amount you pay on your defense budget, which is already massive for the US. And that's usually the tipping point for when an empire starts to fall. It's looking like it's hard to debate Ray Dalio's point on that, is that we're seeing the end of the American empire, even though America never seemed stronger than it is now, getting rid of Maduro, doing what it did in Greenland, trying to end the war in Ukraine, and now getting into Iran with limited interference by Russia and China. Is that a concern that you have? And if you disagree, it's even great. I don't want the American empire to be replaced by an autocracy like China.
It's a great question because it's complicated. I think the answer is complicated. Definitely, the United States is losing its hegemonic power over the world. China's rising. There's no way to stop it. They have 5 times the population, and they're developing, and they now have an entire generation. If you remember, they did the one-child policy for a long time, and now those kids are in their 40s and 30s and 40s. And so these kids received all the attention, all the resources of their parents, and many of them became brilliant engineers. And we're now seeing that. For the longest time, the US said, oh, China's stealing from us. They're taking our tech. They're stealing our tech, and they're just copying it. And that's what they do. Not anymore. Now those kids are old enough to develop their own engineering, magnificent engineering feats, and they're doing it. And a lot of the narrative here has been to, again, just kind of stick with the old narrative for the last 30 years, which is, oh, they're just copying and stealing. But we just saw with like DeepSeek AI, for example, they came around and said, oh, let's do something. You've been doing it, but we're going to do it better. And many engineers around the world are saying China's got some brilliant engineers. I mean, there's just no way around this anymore. So they're rising. There's no way to stop that. The big question that the United States has to ask is, do we want to share or do we want to fall? And if we want to fall, how hard do we want to fall? And what way do we want to fall? How are we going to share? Are we going to share gracefully, right? Or are we going to be extremely defiant and resistant in this sharing? That will happen, whether we like it or not. And unfortunately, right now, the policy in Washington is to fight back, punch them in the face, right? Try whatever we can to stop them from becoming as big as they will inevitably become. Or maybe they already have become that, and we're just not really willing to admit it. And because also we have a certain perspective of what might is, and what we have been attributing might to for the longest time has been military force, military power. Is everybody in the world afraid of you? And that is a really terrible position for the United States to paint itself in when, when my grandfather fought in World War II, that was not the intended outcome, was to just get the world to fear America. It was to get the world to revere America. And we're losing that in a big way. So
That's a good point.
We are falling, but does that mean we're going to be controlled by China? Not if we play our cards right. Not if we're smart about this, right? We can share. It's not about one is going to be dominant over the other. We can share. So it's just a question of how are we going to get to that
multipolar,
point.
A new multipolar world that everyone's been talking about. It's about how we pivot to that world. And it's a good point. We're seeing that happen in real time. I want to go to your point about how much influence they have. Well, there's an article that came out in the Wall Street Journal that really surprised me. It's Lindsey Graham, and I try not to be, too extreme with my thoughts on any single person, and try to be as nuanced as I can. I'm struggling with Lindsey Graham. Seems like a very nice guy, but the things he says are just wild. He's asking the U.S. to get involved in the Lebanese war. He's been egging the U.S. to get involved in the Iran war for so long. He supports any military action anywhere, especially when it supports Israel. He's also been criticizing American allies, Saudi and the UAE, who were caught, and other countries in the Gulf, who were caught into this war, a war they did not want, a war they're suffering from, their mainland. I had a drone explode right next to my apartment. I woke up to it in the morning, and I'm in Dubai, one of the safest places in the world. Dubai did not sign up for this, and Dubai's put, one of the Al-Habtour, a billionaire in Dubai who's very close to the royal family, put out a scathing letter against Trump saying, why do you drag us into this? We put billions for the Board of Peers and Board of Peace and other things you're doing, and other initiatives, and now we're at war, a war we did not want, a war that's unnecessary. And then he also sent another letter, a scathing letter to Lindsey Graham, saying you seem like you're serving Israel, not your own country, or you're not serving the US, you're serving Israel, after Lindsey Graham was criticizing the Gulf for not joining the war. And now I see that article on Wall Street Journal. Lindsey Graham coached Netanyahu, and that's not a report. That's him admitting to it. He coached Netanyahu on how to manipulate Trump into starting the war, and he's bragging about it. So Lindsey made multiple trips to Israel in the weeks before the strikes, met with Mossad, met with Netanyahu, then, quote, coached him on how to lobby the president for action. And the tactic he said that he used was word association games with Trump. So using legacy phrases like, quote, I say Franklin Roosevelt, what do you say to Trump? So essentially, he's bragging about convincing or manipulating, depending what word you want to use, the US president, and then coaching another president how to influence his own president. And then I feel like the system is so flawed where he's bragging about it because I wouldn't say there's no shame, but they're not worried about the repercussions. So when I see an article like this, I'm like, not only is the influence real, which we both agree it's real, it doesn't seem, why are not Americans up in arms? I know some people are like yourself, like Tucker, like Candace and others, are really critical of that undue influence by Israel. But why is the average voter not talking about it? And is the whole anti-Semitism card still working whenever someone criticizes Israel?
I think for some groups it is. I think that the people who aren't heavily following politics, I think that being labeled an anti-Semite is still very tough for them, and they want to avoid that at all cost. Certainly our government has been captured, and Lindsey Graham, that article and what Lindsey Graham did, he should be in jail. And that is, in my opinion, he's a traitor to the country. And I don't say that flippantly. I think that is an absolute act of treason against the United States. We have American soldiers who are dead, and Lindsey Graham helped usher them to their coffins by manipulating the US president and siding with the foreign Middle Eastern president. That is an act of treason. But in this country, we're so captured that it doesn't seem to be considered anything. People just read the article and say, oh, okay, wow, that's terrible. And then they move on from it. But I mean, imagine if that article came out and it wasn't Netanyahu, but it was Vladimir Putin or was Xi Jinping. Yeah. Then people would be up in arms, and Lindsey Graham would be carted in front of Congress and potentially be facing being, I mean, here we are, we locked Julian Assange away for years on end. Lindsey Graham should be facing that same fate because he actually did the crimes and he's admitting it. Crimes against the country. But we are so captured. And the Israelis were really smart. And, I'll give it to them. Like you mentioned, I mean, good for them. They're doing everything that they need to do for their country. They're Israel first, as they should be. But we should be America first, and we should be protecting ourselves from influences that want us to do their bidding. And Israel's been very, very effective at getting a hold of our government. And, they're not alone in doing this. There's many other big interests, be they actual foreign, with foreign interests like the Cubans. The Cubans were extremely powerful in Florida for a very long time. They still are, as we see. But for the longest time, elections were all about who could win Florida and who could win that Cuban vote. And the only way you could get the Cubans on your side is if you said down with Castro and do everything that we possibly can to harm the Cubans. And I think the Israelis figured that out and said, oh, we could take a page out of that book. How do we do it? Well, it's really simple. You just have to buy off all of the politicians. America is for sale. We are a capitalist society, which I'm not against. I want to make that clear. But capitalism, this is just kind of unregulated. And really, it's also, we do have it in a form that is, like nepotistic, and it favors certain entities over others. But we do have a country for sale. And this has infiltrated into our politics because people are able to gain American citizenship or start super PACs and fund political campaigns. And it's even pervasive in the land that is bought in this country. Foreigners can come in and buy up acres and acres and acres of farmland out from underneath Americans. And it's owned now by foreign countries or foreign citizens. And so this is a country for sale. And it's very difficult to regulate that, because once you start regulating it, then you can inch your way into, places that people economically don't want to be. But at the same time, should we have this system that just allows any foreigner or people with more priority of foreign interests for them to come in and buy up our, like I said, politicians all the way to our farmland and our businesses, which then control our politicians more, right? I mean, all of this, it's all interconnected. And the Israelis have figured that out. And they were like, oh, okay, all you have to do is buy them. Okay, well, then we'll just start buying them. And they effectively did. And I would say over the last 20 years, they somehow figured out how to get an entire grip on our government, on our media, on almost every single entity in this country.
Well said. And what was the senator's name? John Fetterman. He was asked about the new leader. They're like, Iran has a new leader. The son of the other leader is like, yeah, let's kill him as well. Like, that mindset is just mental to me, or at least it's bringing people from both sides of the aisle against a common cause. But it's just mental. I like the point that you said. The American system, the democratic capitalist system that we both believe in, that we both prospered in, is also got flaws. It's not perfect. And what we're seeing is other countries capturing those flaws, taking advantage of these flaws. And Israel did the best job at it. That small country in the Middle East has done an incredible job, from what I see, at capitalizing at these flaws or using them for their own interests. So what does that mean for Iran? How, we talked about the report earlier about sending 2,500 troops to the Middle East. Now, it's a small amount of troops. Not sure if that's enough to be able to capture Karg Island, where it's just, again, south of Iran, where 90-something% of the refining, 95% of the oil refining happens. It's very risky if that's the case, because, Iran could use drones, missiles, and artillery much closer to them to target the island. Right now, all the American warships are very far from Iran. But my question to you is more from a political aspect as well. We know there's no appetite for this war, yet here we are. I made a post yesterday, which I'm starting to feel like after that report, I want to take it back. I made a post, and I'm always the naive optimist that's wrong, always. And my post was, am I the only person that believes Trump is trying to end this war by next week? Now, I said trying to end because I think he's not the only person making the calls. There's a lot of interests pulling him in different directions. Based on everything you've seen so far, how likely do you think it is that the war ends before the end of the month?
I think Trump would actually like to end this war. I think one of the ways he might have been talked into this is, look, it'll just be another quick in and out, like the 12-day war. like Operation Midnight Hammer or like Venezuela. It'll just be quick in and out. That's all we need. You're the best at it. You're the only president who's been able to pull this off, right? And then Trump says, oh, okay, yeah, let's do it. But here we are, and the Iranians were like, wait a minute. Oh, you wanted this to be 12 days? Oh, we were thinking 12 years. Sorry, we got our wires crossed here. And you have to look at it from the Iranian perspective. They're not going to let up because they have an objective, and their objective is actually quite clear. Unlike the United States, we can't figure out exactly what is the objective that we have. The Israelis, it's also a little unclear what their objective is, but it's probably the same objective that they've had with everywhere else, which is destabilize it entirely, put it into chaos, keep it weak, mow the lawn every so often. I mean, especially now with taking out the Ayatollah and then his son comes in and takes over. The only option now Israel's left with is, well, every so often, I guess we're just going to have to go mow the lawn and show Iran who's boss. And right now it was back in June, and then it's now here in March, right? So every 9 months, every 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, are we going to go over there and mow the lawn? So maybe that is what Israel is thinking, is that they'll just destabilize the place to that point and keep it weak. The US, it is so unclear what this objective was, but for Iran, it's very clear. And because they have a very clear objective, it's going to be very hard to defeat them. And their clear objective is actually the same objective that Russia has. And that is, get off of my lawn, right? I mean, that's what Russia's saying. Get NATO off of my lawn. You are a threat. You're right up here. You're causing me problems. And now I'm going to push you back and you have to go. And I'm not going to stop until you leave. And that is what I think Iran is now adopting, which is the get off my lawn. You have bases all over the place. You're threatening us. We're not going to allow you to stick around and do this again, continuing mowing our lawn every 6, 9, 12 months. So Iran's objective to me is very clear, which is run the Americans out of there. They have to. They don't really have a choice. And I think they will, because if they don't run the Americans out of there, in a year, this happens again, or in 2 years. You know, they just have to sit their whole population on pins and needles wondering, when are the Americans going to fire at us next? And so they have no choice except to prolong the war and run the Americans out of the entire region, dismantle all the bases, just make it to where it is totally untenable for the US to keep operating all the bases in the Middle East. That to me is a very clear objective. And because they have that objective, it's easier to obtain than what are we doing? We don't even really know. So they want to capture an island where they can refine oil, but ships aren't even being able to make it out.
Yeah.
So like, what is Iran's holding the cards here? And even if we've been able to deplete their military, I mean, we've got the Pentagon saying that Iran's military capabilities have been defeated, yet we're getting all this rhetoric, and I don't even know what's true or not true. I mean, in war, it's very difficult. Same thing with Russia, Ukraine. It's very difficult to know what's actually going on over there because both sides lie. Both sides cover things up, and both sides say, we're winning, right? I mean, that's the narrative of everybody, because you got to keep the morale up for the troops. You got to try to talk your citizenship into going along with it. So all you can do is say, yay, yay, we're winning. Look at, we're pummeling them. But we don't really actually know. We're hearing sources from people that are more in the know with the Iranian side is that they have prepared for a 10-year war. So they are not depleting their stockpiles. They've got plenty in the mountains ready to bring it out at any time. We're hearing from the US, we've defeated them. But then the rhetoric with the US is kind of strange. And I kind of think, well, the Iranians are probably more telling the truth on this than the US, because the US will say, oh, they don't have a Navy anymore, yet we can't get anything through the Strait of Hormuz. If they don't have a Navy anymore, then why don't we I get it. They're maybe launching rockets from land, but then we were told they don't have any more.
Yeah, exactly,
we've been told they don't have anything. So how are they able to attack these ships? How are they able to keep attacking Israel? Why is it that every day isn't then that day the Pentagon comes out and says today is the day we're really going to pummel them worse than they've ever seen? Why would you keep doing that if there's nothing else to pummel? Are you admitting that you're just going after civilians at that point? Like, what are we doing here? So it seems that the rhetoric from the US is not matching up to the reality. And if that's the case, then Iran is much stronger than we think. And people keep calling this an asymmetric war. And I'm like, I don't know which side is actually on the asymmetric side of this. When people claim, well, it's because the US has a much stronger military. But maybe the asymmetry is coming out in a different way. And Iran might be playing this game a bit better than we thought. They've been preparing this for a long time. They've been able to watch the U.S. MO and how we fight wars for a long time. They've sat there studying it and building and studying and building. And here we are. And I think the Iranian objective is clear. I don't think there is an end to this war because Iran cannot afford it. They cannot afford to have their lawn mowed again. And so I think they're going to push forward and force us into a 10-year war.
I am. Every day I start thinking things are getting better. I was telling my partner yesterday morning, I'm like, things seem calmer today. I think the attacks by Iran, either they're shifting strategy, or they're running out of missile launchers or drones. And then that's the day that that same night, we go to bed, we wake up in the morning, the explosion right next to our apartment proved us wrong. And then today I look at the data on the attacks for today, and I'm looking at the data, and that's from the Ministry of Defense, the Dubai Ministry of Defense. They engaged 7 ballistic missiles and 27 UAVs or drones launched from Iran today alone. So I'm like, all right, Iran, who's not meant to have any launchers, the drone factories are getting bombed. On Dubai alone, there's multiple Gulf nations. There's also Israel. There's also US bases. There's Iraq. They're striking Iraq as well. On Dubai alone, they've fired 7 ballistic missiles and 27 drones. Now, Dubai's done a good job intercepting them, but just talks about Iran's capabilities. And today also they struck Turkey for the first time, I think twice. They struck Turkey with ballistic missiles today. They were intercepted as well. So it does question the rhetoric that Iran is losing. Now, when you speak to, you spoke to Professor Morandi early on in the war. I haven't spoken to him in a while. Mm-hmm. What's his stance on this? Now, obviously, he's, I would even call him a propagandist or an avid supporter of the Iranian government. The US is evil. The Iranian government is doing great. They're a great government. The protests in January, they're all Mossad, etc. So I understand he's extreme on one side, but at the same time, when I speak to some of the hawkish people in the US, they're extreme on the other. So when you spoke to the professor, was he surprised by the war? What was his expectation? What did he tell you about the sentiment in Iran?
Yeah, and you're right. To be clear, I mean, Professor Morandi, what I like hearing from him because he's representing the Iranian government essentially. So I'm getting their perspective. It's like a government official, even though he's not totally one, but just to hear from them. And he was actually this time around a bit more solemn than previous engagements. And I don't think he was surprised by the war. I don't think any of the Iranians are surprised by the war. I think they've been hunkering down and waiting for it for a long time. And maybe in a way they're even relieved, like, okay, finally we're getting this over with. And now we can actually see an end to this. And then maybe we can move on in the future from this after 10 years. The Iranians
the sanctions as well.
I mean, they're used to war. They fought a fierce war against Iraq in the 80s. They're much more primed as a population to warfare than the U.S. is, for sure. And I think his stance just seemed to be, look, we're ready. We're ready for this. It's, it definitely was a tone of, this isn't going to be easy, but we're ready and we've been waiting and here it is now. So it was a different tone than I would say previous, like, we've got this, we're killing it, we're doing this, we're doing that. It was a bit of a different tone, but one that I think the Iranian people are resolved in fighting this and getting rid of the threat that has been harming them for 47 years. I think they want to take back their sovereignty in a way. And then, the Iranian people, if the U.S. was out of their space and out of their, and constantly threatening them and sanctioning them, I think the Iranian people would rise up and change their government in the way that they want to change their government. I think, my perspective from the Iranians that I know who are not they're not, there's definitely a big group of American Iranians who are very anti-Iran and Ayatollah, and they absolutely want to be, down with the regime. And I would say that it's, from my perspective, the majority of those are Iranian Jews that I know. And I think a lot of people forget that a huge portion of the Iranian population in the United States is Jewish, and their real loyalty is actually to Israel. So they tend to have the same rhetoric against Iran and the Ayatollah as any other Israeli does. But a lot of the Iranians that I speak to that are from the country, they would say that, yeah, the Ayatollah and that real theocratic style of government is losing popularity for sure. There is still a chunk of people who really like it, but there's a lot of people in Iran, maybe even the majority at this point, who don't really care for it. But what they really don't care for, is for a foreign government to come in and change it for them. They don't want that. And they will rally together to ensure foreign influence stays out. So we're in a way hindering the Iranian people from being able to make the change that they want to make. It's like here in the United States, plenty of people hate Donald Trump. Plenty of people suffer from Trump derangement syndrome. But I tell you what, those same Americans that absolutely hate Donald Trump, if a foreign country came in, bombed our White House, took out our leader and said, we're making change for you because we saw how much you hate him and we saw all those rallies in the streets, those same Americans would suddenly rise up and say, no, that is not the way we want to do this. We'll make the change ourselves. We're not going to let you come in and do it for us. And Americans will rally around. And that's what's going on in Iran. And if we just stayed out of their business, I do think that the Iranian, just like what we've seen with the Saudi government, for example, with the crown prince coming in, is it's become less and less popular. And the crown prince realized it when he came into power effectively, to remain so dogmatic and theocratic. And he started to lift and allow society to develop in a more modern way, right? And Iran would do the same exact thing if they were left alone. The people would pressure the government and say, well, we want to make this change now. We want to make this change now. And really, from my perspective, I mean, you would know better because you're living over there. But I don't think the women in Saudi Arabia have many more freedoms than the women in Iran. I mean, they're different. But they're kind of on the same as far as freedom level. I mean, certainly the Iranian women have to wear the hijab, but other than that, I mean, Iranian women could drive, before 2018, and the Saudi women couldn't. And there's a highly educated female population in Iran. So I think that they would make their own change if left to their own, and they would shape their society the way that they want, but they can't because we keep forcing them to rally around their government like they are now.
Well said. I've only been to Saudi once for like a day or two to interview Prince Al Walid there, and that's it. But I do know that they've only just opened up now to allow concerts and festivals, etc. And
Right.
Iran is heading in the right direction. I found a video someone sent me of like what it's like walking in a mall in Iran. A simple thing like walking in a mall. I felt the same thing when I was in Belarus. When I was in Belarus, I went there. I was in a hotel inside a mall, and I walked there. I'm like, I've been around the world. I should know this by now. But they're just walking in the mall. They're literally people that I can talk English to them. They chill. But everyone looks at Belarus as that little enclave, etc. Now, North Korea could be a different beast, but just very normal, typical people. And Iran is the same. And I watched that video and I posted it. I couldn't find it now. It was literally people. A third of the women in that video in Tehran in a mall were not wearing the hijab. I'm like, what happened to the religious police that I despise? I was so critical. I still am critical of the regime. What they did in January is appalling. But I also agree with you. If you're going to attack them militarily, the example you've given of Trump and people that have Trump derangement syndrome. Well, if you bomb the US, those same people that hated Bush before 9/11 rallied behind Bush after 9/11. The same thing is happening in Iran. We saw those protesters where today the foreign minister and the president were walking in the street with the protesters. If you said to me that was going to happen in January, I'm like, there's no way. People will kill him on the spot. They just walked in the streets of Tehran in a massive protest with no security around them. Yeah. When I watched that, I'm like, what did you do? You've just given the regime that's not a good regime. They're putting theology and above your own people's well-being when it comes to foreign policy. It's not a good regime.
I mean, but the United States is doing that too, by the way, because a lot of our politicians are doing this for theology, thinking that this is the battle of Armageddon and Jesus Christ is going to return.
Oh, those guys, yeah.
So we're doing it too for we have a very religious based foreign policy when it comes to Iran for quite a few of our politicians.
I don't know how, I was born a Christian. I have a Christian family. and part of my family was very religious, and I just never understood. So I'm not religious anymore, but I've never understood how religion can find a role in governments and policy making. Like, it just never clicks in my mind that when you're deciding what's the best decision, or just deciding, who should have what land in Israel, Palestine, going back 2,000 years makes zero sense to me. Like, if we do this for all countries around the world, the whole world map would change. But yeah, Iran and anyone in the US doing it, it just doesn't make sense. Now, I'm not a fan of the regime either. What they did in January is horrific, and their foreign policy has also been destabilizing as well. The whole power struggle between them and Saudi has not been good for the region. But obviously, a war is not the solution. Obviously, now an invasion is even worse. And we said earlier, you don't think, and we agreed that we don't think Trump wants this, and he never wanted this. He doesn't want this now. But do you think he will still get dragged into it for whatever reason, or do you think he'll be able to pull out? What would be your guess?
No, I think he is. I think he's now dragged in. I don't think the Iranians are going to let us out of the war. I think they're going on the offensive. So I think at first they were on the defense, and they were the ones who were attacked first. But we struck first, and now they're going for the death blows. They're going to ensure that the U.S. gets run out of the region. They really don't have a choice. From their perspective, they really don't have a choice. They cannot afford to have their lawn mowed every so many months or so many years. They have to now put a stop to it for the sake of their people, for the sake of their country. That is the only objective. They have to run the U.S. out of the entire region. And I think that they are playing a strategy that they're trying to get the other countries in the region to go along with that and to say, yeah, you guys have to go because you're causing us war. Just like, maybe the United Arab Emirates says we don't want war and you did this to us, but the UAE has American bases. So maybe it's time to pack up those bases and go. I mean, it's like, look, if you can't say you didn't ask for this when you allowed for this foreign military that you absolutely knew had an aggressive bent toward certain countries in the region to use your land and soil. You're complicit now. I mean, that's the viewpoint of Iran. They're sitting there looking at all these other countries. They're like, you're all complicit. And until you all realize you're complicit, we're going to keep bombing you and targeting these bases until you realize you're complicit. And you don't want these missiles flying in your airspace anymore. Okay, then run the Americans out. So I think it's a strategy. The Iranians are playing a strategy that is similar to what the Chinese do. I mean, the Iranian culture is very Asian. It's a very Asian culture, actually. People kind of equate it more to, they think it's more like Arab because they're Muslim, but actually they're much more like Asians. And their thinking is more of a long-term thinking, like Chinese strategy. And so they're playing a different game. It's not just kinetic warfare for them. They're also doing psychological and just planning it out and saying, okay, if we just close the Strait of Hormuz, I mean, really all they could do, they don't even have to fire any more missiles. They could just close the Strait of Hormuz,
Exactly,
and they know that.
Exactly.
And they also know that they could just fire at all of the other countries in the region and get those countries to tell the Americans to leave, to where the Iranians don't even have to fight it. They just will get you guys to do it in your countries, right? And say, demand it until you all rise up and say, we want them to leave because we're sick of the bombs being dropped in our country. We just want to live in safety. So they've got a different war strategy that is a bit Middle Eastern war strategy, but it's more, I would say, mixed with the Chinese. And I think most Americans, most Westerners in general, don't realize that the Iranians are actually closer mentally to Asians than they are to other groups. And it would be wise of them to remember that, because then they would understand that they're not playing a game of checkers, nor are they playing a game of chess. They're playing a very complicated game of Go.
Yeah, a good point. Sun Tzu, The Art of War. That's a very good point. And I like the point you said. They don't need to inflict a lot of damage to the US or Israel or even the Gulf. These are all pretty much bonuses. All they need to do is keep the Strait of Hormuz closed, and they won the war, because the global economy will not be able to sustain this. Trump will not be able to politically sustain this, and the war will, I wouldn't say the war will come to end, because that's up to both parties to decide when. But that's definitely putting Trump in a corner. and maybe Trump will give concessions that might involve removing sanctions after this war. We'll see. But no,
Maybe.
Kim, that was an incredible discussion. I really, really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for jumping on, and love what you do on YouTube. I've been watching your show for a while.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you, Kim.
Great discussion.